Dying at 68, she sold bread at the market. Then a TV show found her. Welcome back and enjoy the story. The morning sun filtered weakly through the weathered roof of Oceanside Market as Wara Simpson arranged sourdough loaves on her modest wooden stand. Her fingers, marked by years of kneading dough, moved with practiced precision, despite the early spring chill numbing her joints. For 15 years, she had occupied this same corner of the farmer's market in Monterey, known to locals simply as the bread lady. Most customers who exchanged pleasantries with her had no idea that the petite woman with silver hair pinned in a practical bun had once commanded boardrooms and designed award-winning buildings across America. She preferred it that way. Wara tucked a stray wisp of hair behind her ear and straightened her simple apron, embroidered with sprigs of wheat her granddaughter would never know she'd sown. The thought brought a familiar ache to her chest, one she'd learned to breathe through rather than indulge. 15 years had passed since she'd seen her daughter Vanessa's face outside of occasional social media glimpses. 15 years since the scandal that stripped her of her architectural firm, her reputation, and eventually her family relationships. The modest income from her bread sales covered the rent for her small apartment above a bookstore 3 blocks from the market, and little else. But there was dignity in the work that had sustained generations of women in her family before careers like architecture had been an option for them. Her grandmother had supported 5 children selling bread during the Great Depression. At least, Wara only had herself to feed. "Morning, Miss Simpson," called Marco, the fishmonger whose stand faced hers across the narrow market aisle. "Looks like we might get some out-of-towners today. Saw some kind of TV van pulling up outside." Wara nodded politely but felt a flicker of anxiety. Publicity of any kind made her nervous, a stark change from the days when she'd confidently given interviews to architectural magazines and newspapers. She'd chosen this small coastal town precisely because it was overlooked by most tourists who preferred the more famous Carmel by the Sea just down the coast. As if summoned by her anxious thoughts, a woman with a clipboard and a man balancing a camera on his shoulder entered through the market's side door, followed by a slender man in an expensive-looking jacket. They paused at various stands, filming short interactions, before making their way deeper into the market. Wara turned her attention to an elderly man who approached her stand. Mr. Gunnison, who came every Wednesday for a loaf of her dark rye. "The usual?" she asked, already reaching for his preferred bread. "Please," he smiled, revealing dentures slightly too perfect for his weathered face. "My daughter's visiting this weekend. Told her I've been saving the best bread in California for her arrival." Wara felt a pang at the casual mention of a daughter who visited, who was expected and welcomed. She wrapped the loaf in brown paper with efficient movements that betrayed none of her emotional turmoil. "I hope you enjoy your time together," she said, meaning it despite the envy that twisted beneath her ribs. She just handed Mr. Gunnison his change when she noticed the camera crew had stopped at Marco's fish display. The slender man, clearly the host of whatever program they were filming, enthusiastically examined a large halibut while Marco explained something about sustainable fishing practices. Wara allowed herself to relax slightly. They'd likely move. Onto the cheese vendor next, then exit through the main doors without ever noticing her humble bread stand. But when the host turned away from the fish display, his gaze landed directly on her rustic loaves. His eyebrows rose with interest, and he said something to the woman with the clipboard, who nodded and made notes. Wara busied herself rearranging. Breads that needed no rearranging, hoping to appear too occupied for interruptions. The strategy failed. "Excuse me," said a warm, professional voice. Wara looked up to find the host standing before her stand, camera crew hanging back, but clearly focused on them. "I'm Vincent Pierce from Coastal Cuisine. Those sourdough loaves look extraordinary. Would you mind telling us about them?" Wara's throat tightened. On camera. They wanted to put her on camera. I'm sorry, but I don't... We're filming traditional food artisans along the California coast, Vincent continued smoothly. That crust has a particular pattern I haven't seen before. Is it a special technique? Despite her anxiety, pride flickered within her. The scoring pattern on her sourdough was indeed unique, a family signature dating back to her great-grandmother who'd learned it in the old country. It's a traditional method, she found herself saying. 5 generations of women in my family have used it. Vincent's eyes lit up. 5 generations. That's exactly the kind of food heritage we're documenting. Would you be willing to share a bit about your process? Just a few minutes on camera? The woman with the clipboard stepped forward. We'd be happy to purchase several loaves, of course. Our viewers love discovering authentic artisanal foods. Wara glanced at Marco, who gave her an encouraging thumbs up from behind his counter. 15 years of careful anonymity warred against the simple human desire to be seen, to have her work appreciated. More practically, selling several loaves at once would help with this month's tight budget, especially since her landlord had recently hinted at raising her rent. Very well, she conceded, but just a brief segment. Vincent beamed. Wonderful. I'm Vincent, as I mentioned. This is our producer Diane and our cameraman Eddie, and you are... Wara Simpson, she replied, the name still feeling slightly foreign even after 15 years. She'd legally changed it after the scandal, borrowing her grandmother's maiden name to distance herself from newspaper headlines that had once declared acclaimed architect Tamara Richardson implicated in investment fraud. Lovely to meet you, Miss Simpson. We'll just set up quickly, and then I'll ask you a few questions about your bread. Just pretend the camera isn't there, and speak to me like you would any customer interested in your techniques. Easier said than done, Wara thought as the cameraman positioned himself, and light suddenly illuminated her simple stand, making the worn wood and humble display seem even more modest than she'd realized. She smoothed her apron nervously, wishing she'd worn something other than her practical grey cardigan that morning. Rolling in 3, 2... The producer pointed silently at Vincent, who turned to the camera with a practiced smile. I'm here, at the historic Oceanside Market in Monterey, where local vendors have been selling fresh goods for over a century. While exploring this culinary treasure trove, I've discovered something special. He turned to Wara with choreographed surprise. These remarkable sourdough loaves are created by Wara Simpson, using techniques passed down through 5 generations of her family. Ms. Simpson, that scoring pattern is quite distinctive. Can you tell us about it? The camera swung toward her, and Wara felt perspiration bead along her hairline, despite the market's chill. She cleared her throat, focusing on the bread rather than the lens pointed at her face. The pattern serves a purpose beyond decoration, she explained, falling unconsciously into the instructional tone she'd once used when presenting architectural concepts to clients. These specific cuts allow the bread to expand properly during baking while creating a consistent texture throughout the loaf. She demonstrated on an unbaked loaf she'd been preparing to score, her knife making precise, confident movements that revealed decades of muscle memory. The familiar action steadied her nerves. The starter for this sourdough descended from one my great-grandmother brought from Europe in 1903, she continued, warming to the subject despite herself. I feed it daily with organic flour ground at a mill just outside town. Vincent appeared, genuinely fascinated. May I? He asked, gesturing to a finished loaf. When Wara nodded, he broke the bread open, the camera zooming in on the perfect open crumb structure as steam escaped into the cool market air. The aroma is incredible, slightly tangy, but with remarkable depth. The longer fermentation develops. Those complex flavors, Wara explained. 18 hours for this particular bread. Most commercial operations rush the process. And you can taste the difference, Vincent agreed, taking a bite. His eyes widened in what appeared to be genuine appreciation. That's extraordinary. The crust has such satisfying resistance, but the interior is tender and almost creamy. For the next 10 minutes, Uara found herself explaining fermentation techniques, flour selection, and the importance of dough hydration levels. She demonstrated her kneading method, hands moving with the assured grace that came from thousands of repetitions. Despite her initial reluctance, there was undeniable pleasure in discussing her craft with someone who seemed to truly appreciate the science and artistry behind it. "One last question, Ms. Simpson," Vincent said as the segment wound down. "What led you to become a baker? Was this always your passion?" The question struck too close to the life she'd left behind. Uara's hands stilled on the dough she'd been shaping. "Baking connects me to my family heritage," she said carefully. "There's something profoundly satisfying about creating something nourishing with your hands." Not a lie, but not the complete truth either. She'd only returned to her family's baking traditions after losing everything else. "Well, your dedication to craft is evident in every loaf," Vincent concluded, seemingly satisfied with her diplomatic answer. "Viewers, if you find yourself in Monterey, Oceanside Market should be on your must-visit list, especially on Wednesdays through Saturdays when you can taste Ms. Simpson's extraordinary sourdough for yourself." "And cut," called the producer. "Great segment, Vincent. Ms. Simpson, thank you so much. That was wonderful footage." Vincent purchased 4 loaves while the crew packed up their equipment. "Truly exceptional bread," he told her, handing over cash that would cover nearly a day's sales. "This is exactly the kind of traditional craftsmanship our show celebrates. Our viewers will love your segment." Uara managed a small smile as she wrapped his purchases. "Thank you for your interest. It was nice to discuss the process with someone who appreciates it." As the crew departed, Marco hurried over from his fish stand. "You're going to be famous," he exclaimed. "My cousin was on that show last year with his olive oil business. Orders tripled after the episode aired." Uara felt a cold knot form in her stomach. "When will this air?" she asked. "Their episodes run on Sundays at 8 p.m., Marco replied. "National broadcast. Plus, they put segments on their social media. Great exposure for the market. National broadcast. Social media." Uara steadied herself against her stand as the implications sank in. After 15 years of careful anonymity, she would be visible again. Her carefully constructed sanctuary suddenly felt fragile, its walls paper-thin against the outside world she'd escaped. What if someone recognized her? What if Vanessa saw it? The questions echoed in her mind as she mechanically served the day's remaining customers. When the market finally closed, she packed her unsold loaves into cloth bags with trembling hands. The familiar walk home felt longer than usual, each step heavy with apprehension about what she might have set in motion. Her apartment welcomed her with its modest consistency, the small kitchenette where she tested new recipes, the worn armchair positioned to catch afternoon light perfect for reading, shelves lined with baking books and architectural volumes she couldn't bear to part with. A single photograph sat on her bedside table, Vanessa at 16, before everything fell apart. Uara placed her unsold bread on the counter and sank into her armchair, finally allowing the day's tension to surface. 5 minutes on camera after 15 years of careful invisibility. She'd rebuilt her life from the ground up after losing everything, creating a simple existence that, if not joyful, at least contained dignity and purpose. Had she just compromised it all for a moment of validation? She closed her eyes, remembering the sensation of the camera's focus, the rare pleasure of discussing her craft with someone who valued it. Despite her anxiety, there had been something unexpectedly satisfying about that brief acknowledgement of her skill and knowledge. Too exhausted to analyze further, Wara prepared for bed with her usual precision. Whatever consequences might come from today's filming, she would face them as she had faced every other challenge, with the resilience that had become her most reliable companion. As she drifted towards sleep, her mind cycled between anxiety and a tiny, almost forgotten spark of what might have been excitement. If you are enjoying the story, type 5 in the comments and subscribe for more videos like this. If not, type 0. It helps me create even better content for you. Continuing, Sunday arrived with merciless speed. Wara had spent the intervening days in a state of low-grade anxiety, jumping slightly whenever the bell above the market entrance chimed, half expecting camera crews or, worse, faces from her past life. But the market had maintained its usual rhythms. The morning rush of restaurants purchasing wholesale ingredients, the midday lull, and the late afternoon surge of locals gathering supplies for dinner. By 7:45 p.m. on Sunday evening, Wara had positioned herself stiffly on her sofa, a cup of chamomile tea cooling untouched on the coffee table before her. The television, rarely used except for occasional documentaries, was tuned to the channel where Coastal Cuisine would air in 15 minutes. She'd considered not watching at all, but decided it was better to know exactly what had been broadcast than to wonder. At precisely 8 p.m., Vincent Pierce's polished smile filled her screen, welcoming viewers to a journey along California's Central Coast. Wara's segment didn't appear until nearly 20 minutes into the program, following features on sustainable fishing and artisanal cheese production. When her face finally appeared on screen, Wara barely recognized herself. The lighting had softened the lines around her eyes, and the camera angle somehow made her appear more dignified than she felt in daily life. To her relief, the editing had been respectful. Vincent's narration described her as a master baker, preserving traditional techniques in an age of mass production. Her explanations of sourdough fermentation came across as authoritative rather than pedantic. Most importantly, no mention was made of her past or any speculation about her background. She was simply Wara Simpson, bread artisan. As the segment ended and the show moved on to a vineyard tour, Wara released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Perhaps this would amount to nothing, a fleeting 5 minutes of minor recognition that would dissipate as quickly as it had appeared. She switched off the television and prepared for bed, determined to return to normal life the next morning. That determination lasted until 6 a.m. when her phone rang, a rare enough occurrence to startle her from sleep. The market manager's name flashed on the screen. "Wara, sorry to call so early," said Jerry's gruff voice when she answered. "You'd better bring extra flour today. There's already a line forming outside the market." "A line? But we don't open." "For 3 hours." "Yeah, well, seems that TV show made an impression. People are asking specifically for the bread lady from Coastal Cuisine. How many loaves can you bring today?" Wara's mind raced, calculating ingredients and oven capacity. "I have 12 ready from yesterday's preparations. I could perhaps manage another 20 by midday if I start immediately." "Do what you can," Jerry said. "I'll try to manage expectations. See you soon." The line had indeed grown by the time Wara arrived at the market, carrying her first batch of loaves in cloth-lined baskets. People she'd never seen before, tourists by the look of their cameras and casual attire, waited alongside regular customers. She felt their eyes tracking her as Jerry unlocked the main doors, their whispers confirming her fears. "That's her, from the show!" Marco grinned as she set up her stand. "Celebrity status already. My fish will sell well just from being near you." Wara managed a tight smile in response, her anxiety mounting as customers began approaching, not in the usual trickle, but in a steady stream that quickly formed a queue. By noon, she had sold every loaf she'd brought and taken orders for more than she could possibly produce in her small home kitchen. "I can pick up tomorrow?" asked a woman who introduced herself as the chef at a high-end restaurant in Carmel. We'd like to feature your bread in our weekend tasting menu. Such an authentic story. 5 generations of traditional baking. Our customers love that kind of heritage. As Wara wrote down the order with hands slightly unsteady from the morning's chaos, a tall figure at the edge of her peripheral vision caught her attention. Something about the posture, straight-backed, hands clasped behind, triggered a flicker of recognition that sent ice through her veins. She looked up sharply, heart pounding. The man observing her from beside the flower stand was in his 70s, distinguished silver hair framing a face she hadn't seen in nearly 2 decades. William Hargrove, former dean of the Architectural College, where she'd taught before starting her own firm, and president of the American Architectural Foundation during her professional downfall. Their eyes met across the market aisle. For a suspended moment, Wara thought he might turn away, pretend he hadn't recognized her. Instead, he inclined his head in acknowledgement and began walking directly toward her stand. "The sourdough appears to be sold out," he remarked, his voice unchanged by the passing years. "Quite the popular artisan you've become." Wara's throat constricted. "William, I didn't expect to see you in Monterey." "Nor I you, Tamara." He used her former name deliberately, though quietly enough that nearby customers couldn't hear. "Or do you prefer Uara now?" "How did you find me?" she asked, ignoring his question. "I didn't find you at all. I was visiting my son's family in Carmel. His wife watches that cooking program religiously." A hint of irony touched his expression. "Imagine my surprise when my former colleague appeared, demonstrating bread-making techniques with the same precision she once applied to cantilevered structures." Wara glanced nervously at the customers still browsing nearby. "This isn't the place to discuss the past." William nodded, understanding her concern. "I'll be at the Cypress Inn in Carmel until Thursday. Perhaps we could meet for coffee. There are matters I'd like to discuss with you." He placed a business card on her stand. "My contact information. Some things have changed since back then." Before she could respond, he turned and walked away, shoulders square with the same military-influenced posture she remembered from faculty meetings and conference panels. Wara slipped his card into her apron pocket, her mind spinning with unwelcome memories and fresh anxiety. The remainder of her market day passed in a blur of new faces, orders she wasn't sure how to fulfill, and the constant undercurrent of dread that William's appearance had triggered. When the market finally closed, she declined Marco's invitation to celebrate her newfound popularity at a nearby cafe, claiming fatigue. In truth, she needed solitude to process the day's events and decide what to do about William's unexpected reappearance in her life. He had been among those who publicly distanced themselves from her when the scandal broke, neither condemning nor defending her as her reputation crumbled. Back in her apartment, Uara placed William's card on her small dining table and stared at it, while she mechanically ate a simple dinner. The Architectural Heritage Preservation Society, the card read, with William listed as Executive Director. She'd heard of the organization. It had gained prominence in recent years for its work protecting historically significant buildings from demolition. After dinner, curiosity overcame caution. She opened her rarely used laptop and searched for information about William and his organization. Articles described the Society's efforts to preserve architectural landmarks and advocate for contextual urban development. Several mentioned William's leadership, characterizing him as a champion of architectural integrity and a respected voice in preservation ethics. As she scrolled through the search results, an incoming email notification appeared. The sender's address made her breath catch. Diane Torres, producer of Coastal Cuisine. Wara clicked on the message with trembling fingers. "Dear Ms. Simpson, I hope this email finds you well. The response to your segment on yesterday's episode has been extraordinary. Our social media platforms have seen unprecedented engagement, with viewers specifically commenting on your bread-making techniques and what many are calling your elegant precision. Several have specifically requested more detailed demonstrations of your methods. We would like to offer you a recurring guest spot on our program, featuring traditional baking techniques. These segments would be filmed monthly and would highlight seasonal variations on your sourdough recipe, as well as other traditional breads you might wish to showcase. This would, of course, be a paid position, details of which we can discuss if you're interested in this opportunity. We understand this would represent a significant change from your current operations and would be happy to work with your schedule and preferences. Please let me know if this possibility interests you. We believe your knowledge and approach would be tremendously valuable to our viewers. Warm regards, Diane Torres, Executive Producer, Coastal Cuisine. Wara read the email 3 times, her practical mind already calculating what such an opportunity might mean financially. Her landlord had recently left a notice stating that rent would increase by nearly 30% next month, an amount that would strain her modest income beyond sustainable limits. The market's increased foot traffic might help, but the additional orders would require kitchen facilities beyond what her small apartment could accommodate. And now, William Hargrove had found her. The carefully constructed walls between her, past and present, were crumbling, and she felt powerless to reinforce them. Wara closed her laptop without responding to the email. She would sleep on the decision, approach it with the same methodical consideration she'd once applied to structural engineering problems. One step at a time, she reminded herself, just as she'd rebuilt her life from its foundation 15 years ago. But as she prepared for bed, the thought that kept returning wasn't about William or the television offer. It was the realization that somewhere Vanessa might have seen her on the program. Her daughter might at this very moment know exactly where to find her after 15 years of silence. The possibility was equally terrifying and heartbreaking. Uara's sleep that night was fitful, punctuated by dreams where she stood on a stage, trying to give an architectural presentation while the audience expected her to bake bread instead. She woke before dawn, exhausted but restless, and found herself automatically beginning the day's baking preparations while her mind continued to churn through yesterday's developments. The television producer's offer was tempting primarily for financial reasons, especially with the impending rent increase. The practical aspects could potentially be managed. Perhaps Jerry might allow her to use the market's small commercial kitchen during off hours to prepare for filming days. But the increased visibility would mean more opportunities for people from her past to recognize her, people like William Hargrove or Vanessa. She placed dough in proofing baskets with mechanical precision, her body performing the familiar motions, while her mind grappled with decisions she'd never anticipated having to make. By the time she arrived at the market, she'd resolved to at least meet with William. Whatever his reasons for seeking her out, knowing his intentions would be better than wondering. The market was again unusually busy, with several customers mentioning they'd seen her on Coastal Cuisine. Uara served them with professional courtesy, neither encouraging nor discouraging conversation about the program. During a rare lull, she used her cell phone to text William, suggesting they meet at a small cafe near the market the following afternoon. His response came quickly, a simple confirmation. That evening, after returning home with notes for dozens of special orders she'd need to somehow fulfill, Uara finally replied to the television producer. She expressed cautious interest in the recurring guest spot, but requested more details about the commitment involved and filming locations. The response came within minutes. Diane was clearly eager to secure her participation. The proposed arrangement was more generous than Uara had anticipated. 4 seasonal segments initially, filmed at a studio kitchen in Monterey rather than requiring travel to Los Angeles. The compensation offered would cover 6 months of her. Increased rent. A car would be sent to transport her to and from filming days, and she would have approval over all content before it aired. It seemed almost too accommodating, raising Uara's suspicions. In her experience, such generosity usually came with hidden expectations. Still, her practical circumstances left little room for hesitation. She wrote back accepting the offer, but insisting on a formal contract before proceeding. The next afternoon, Uara arrived at the agreed-upon cafe 15 minutes early, selecting a table in the corner with a clear view of the entrance. She wore her best cardigan, still modest but less worn than her market attire, and had arranged her silver hair in a neater bun than usual. Presenting a dignified appearance felt important for this encounter with her past. William arrived precisely on time, wearing a tweed jacket that wouldn't have looked out of place in the faculty lounge 20 years earlier. He ordered black coffee before sitting across from her, his posture formal but not unfriendly. "You look well, Tamara," he began, using her former name again. "It's Uara now," she corrected him quietly. "Legally changed." He nodded. "Uara, then. The years have been kinder to you than many of our colleagues. That precision of movement you always had, it translates well to your current craft." "Why? Did you seek me out, William? Surely not to comment on my baking technique." He sipped his coffee before answering. "Directness was always your strength." "Very well. I'm here because the Architectural Heritage Preservation Society is undertaking its most ambitious project to date, and I believe you possess expertise that would be valuable to our efforts." Uara's surprise must have shown on her face because William continued quickly. "The Francis Institute commissioned the Society to document historically significant West Coast architectural works at risk from climate change and development pressures. We're assembling a team of experts in various architectural styles and periods." He paused. "Your knowledge of coastal modern adaptations would fill a critical gap in our panel." "My knowledge," Uara repeated flatly, "from a career I haven't practiced in 15 years, a career that ended in public disgrace." William's expression turned somber. "A disgrace engineered by a partner who betrayed your trust, a fact that has become much clearer in hindsight. Marcus Delgado's subsequent legal issues revealed patterns that cast your situation in a very different light." The mention of her former business partner sent a jolt of anger through Uara. Marcus had been the financial mind behind their architectural firm, the one who had diverted client funds into questionable investments that collapsed spectacularly. In 2009, when the scheme unraveled, he had skillfully directed blame toward her, leveraging her position as the firm's public face. By the time investigations revealed his primary culpability, her reputation had been irreparably damaged. "The architectural community's judgment was swift and final," she said, unable to keep bitterness from her voice. No one was interested in nuance once the headlines ran. "Many of us have regretted our hasty conclusions," William admitted, "particularly as Marcus's subsequent behavior revealed his true character. He's currently serving time for investment fraud, you know." Uara didn't know. She had deliberately avoided news about her former world, finding the clean break less painful than constant reminders of what she'd lost. "This project," William continued, "represents an opportunity to reclaim your expertise in a context focused entirely on preservation rather than commerce. Your designs for the Monterey Peninsula Conference Center demonstrated remarkable sensitivity to both environmental conditions and historical context. That's precisely the perspective we need." "I'm not an architect anymore, William. I bake bread." "You were one of the most talented structural engineers I ever taught," he countered. That knowledge doesn't simply vanish. The project needs your expertise, not your licensure status. Wara stared at her cooling tea, conflicting emotions, churning beneath her composed exterior. Part of her, a part she'd tried to silence for 15 years, responded instinctively to the intellectual challenge William described. Another part recoiled from the idea of stepping back into a world that had rejected her so thoroughly. "I need time to consider this," she finally said. "My life is complicated at the moment." "Of course." William placed a folder on the table between them. "This contains information about the project, including the scope, timeline, and compensation. We're particularly interested in your documentation of the Anderson House in Carmel and the old Cannery Row structures you helped preserve before," he paused delicately, "before your career change." "The Anderson House," Wara murmured, memories surfacing of cantilevered balconies designed to withstand coastal erosion, glass walls positioned to capture ocean views while minimizing wind exposure. "Is it still standing?" "It is, though. The current owners are seeking permits for significant alterations. Our hope is to document its innovative features before any changes occur." As Wara reached for the folder, the cafe door opened, admitting a young woman in a coastal cuisine jacket. She scanned the room, spotted Wara, and approached with a professional smile. "Ms. Simpson, I'm Lauren, Diane's assistant. She asked me to deliver this contract for your review." She placed an envelope beside William's folder. "She's very excited about your segments. The first filming is scheduled for next Tuesday, if that works for you." Thank you," Wara replied automatically, hyper-aware of William's raised eyebrows. After Lauren departed, William gave a small smile. "Your bread-making has attracted television interest?" "A recent development," Wara admitted, embarrassment, mixing with a strange defiance. "Life takes unexpected turns." "Indeed it does," William agreed. "Perhaps your current visibility isn't entirely coincidental to your potential involvement with our project. Architectural preservation increasingly depends on public engagement. The suggestion that her newfound bread-baking recognition might somehow benefit serious architectural work struck Wara as almost absurd, yet William seemed genuinely thoughtful rather than dismissive. "I'll review your materials," she promised, gathering both the folder and envelope, "but I make no commitments yet." "Fair enough." William stood, extending his hand across the table. "Whatever you decide, it was good to see you again, Wara. The architectural world lost something significant when you left it." The unexpected acknowledgement caught her off guard. She shook his hand briefly, nodding in lieu of the words that seemed lodged in her throat. Walking home, Wara felt as though the ground beneath her feet had shifted subtly, altering her trajectory in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. The safe, anonymous life she'd constructed was transforming, whether she wanted it to or not. Like a building foundation experiencing unexpected geological pressure, she would need to either reinforce her existing structure or redesign it entirely to accommodate new realities. What would she choose? Does she remain in the shadows of her former life or step cautiously back into the light? Back in her apartment, Wara spread William's materials across her small dining table, reviewing project timelines and objectives with the focused attention she'd once given to architectural specifications. The Society's documentation initiative was impressively comprehensive, examining endangered coastal structures from San Diego to Seattle. The Anderson House was just one of 23 buildings they hoped to catalogue in detail. As she read, Wara realized with a start that she recognized many of the architects named in the project, former colleagues whose careers had continued their upward trajectory while hers had abruptly terminated. names she'd deliberately avoided thinking about for 15 years. Beside the society's materials lay the television contract, offering a very different kind of opportunity. Coastal Cuisine wanted her to demonstrate traditional baking methods in 4 seasonal segments, with potential for more if viewer response remained positive. The financial compensation was modest by entertainment industry standards, but significant compared to her market income. 2 paths diverging before her, neither one part of the careful plan she'd constructed after her fall from grace. Both carrying potential for recognition she'd studiously avoided, both in their different ways, acknowledging value in her skills and knowledge. Wara rubbed her temples, a headache building behind her eyes. Too much change, too quickly. She needed to approach these decisions methodically, as she would any complex problem. She found a notebook and began listing pros and cons for each. Opportunity, her handwriting precise and architectural in its clarity. The television offer provided immediate financial security, but increased her public visibility. The preservation project engaged her dormant expertise, but reconnected her to a world that had rejected her. Both would complicate her carefully simple existence. As she worked through her analysis, her phone chimed with a text message from an unknown number. Frowning, she checked the screen. "Is this Uara Simpson from Oceanside Market?" "This is Jerry's niece, Lena. He gave me your number. I work at Hillcrest Bakery downtown and heard you might need commercial kitchen space for increased production. We're closed Mondays and Tuesdays. You'd be welcome to use our facilities those days. Let me know if you're interested." Wara stared at the message, surprised by the unexpected offer that seemingly addressed one of her most pressing practical concerns. The market community had largely ignored her for years. Now suddenly they were reaching out with assistance. Was it mere self-interest, her increased popularity bringing more customers to the market, or genuine neighborliness she'd failed to recognize during her years of deliberate isolation? She texted back a cautious thank you, agreeing to discuss details with Lena the following day. Then she returned to her decision-making process, now with the added possibility of expanded production capacity. Hours later, having analyzed both opportunities from every practical angle, Wara still found herself uncertain. The rational approach that had served her throughout her life seemed inadequate for decisions so entangled with identity and past trauma. On impulse, she opened the small wooden box where she kept her most personal possessions. Inside lay her original architectural license, her university medals, and a small, smooth stone Vanessa had given her on a childhood beach trip. "It looks like your buildings, Mom," her daughter had said, pointing to the stone's clean lines and balanced proportions. "Oh, natural architecture." The memory sent a pang through her chest. Vanessa would be 43 now, perhaps with grey strands in her dark hair like Wara's own. Did she still have the intuitive eye for structure that had delighted Wara when she was young? Had she passed that gift to the granddaughter Wara had never met? With sudden clarity, Wara realized that her careful analysis had overlooked the most significant factor. Both opportunities represented potential bridges to the life and relationships she'd lost. If Vanessa saw her on television or heard about her involvement with the Architectural Heritage Society, might she reach out? After 15 years, was reconciliation even possible? The thought was both terrifying and magnetic, drawing her toward the risk of visibility after years of deliberate obscurity. Wara closed the wooden box and made her decision. She would accept both opportunities, cautiously with clear boundaries, but she would move forward. The television segments would provide financial stability while she contributed to the preservation. A project on a limited basis. After 15 years of hiding, perhaps it was time to reclaim pieces of herself she'd abandoned. She signed the television contract and composed an email to William, agreeing to document the Anderson house and one other structure, but declining broader involvement for now. Then she contacted Lena about the kitchen space, setting up a meeting to discuss terms. Each action felt like placing a stone in a new foundation, tentative yet purposeful, building toward a structure she couldn't yet fully envision. That night, Uwara slept better than she had in days, as if decision had released some of the tension coiled within her. When she woke, sunlight was filtering through her bedroom curtains, illuminating dust motes that danced in the golden beams. She watched them for a moment, reminded of architectural renderings where light paths were carefully calculated through designed spaces. The week that followed tested her organizational skills as she balanced market sales, kitchen arrangements, with Lena and preparation for her first television filming. The commercial kitchen at Hillcrest Bakery offered 3 times the capacity of her home oven, allowing her to meet the increasing demand generated by her brief television appearance. Jerry rearranged the market layout to accommodate the lines at her stand, giving her a more prominent location near the main entrance. Tuesday arrived with disconcerting speed. The car Coastal Cuisine sent to transport her was sleek and black, the driver professional but distant. Uwara sat stiffly in the back seat, a basket of pre-prepared dough beside her, wearing clothes she'd carefully selected to appear professional yet authentic, a crisp linen shirt beneath a new apron embroidered with wheat sheaves. The studio kitchen gleamed with stainless steel efficiency that made her modest market stand seem rustic by comparison. Diane greeted her with enthusiasm, introducing a small army of production personnel whose names blurred together in Uwara's anxiety. "Vincent is looking forward to your segment," Diane assured her, leading her to a preparation area. "He rarely gets excited about repeat guests, but your bread really impressed him, and the viewer response has been extraordinary." "What exactly will be expected today?" Uwara asked, unpacking her basket with careful movements that disguised her nerves. "Simple demonstration of your sourdough process, focusing on spring ingredients. Vincent will ask questions. You respond naturally as you work. We're aiming for authentic instruction, not scripted cooking show perfection." Diane glanced at her notes. "Your segment runs about 12 minutes. We'll need some close-ups of your scoring technique. Viewers specifically commented on your hand movements." The filming itself proved less intimidating than Uwara had feared. The familiar rhythms of dough preparation steadied her, and Vincent's questions were thoughtful rather than intrusive. She demonstrated her spring variation with fresh herbs and explained the adjustments needed for warmer weather fermentation. When Vincent asked about her family history of bread making, she shared carefully edited stories about her grandmother's kitchen during the Depression, redirecting attention to the techniques rather than her personal history. "Cut!" "Perfect segment," called the director after her final demonstration of the signature scoring pattern. "Ms. Simpson, you're a natural on camera." Uwara accepted the compliment with a small nod, surprised to realize she'd actually enjoyed certain aspects of the filming. Explaining the science behind fermentation had awakened the teacher in her, the part that had once lectured to architectural students about load-bearing calculations and material integrity. As she gathered her supplies, Vincent approached with his producer's iPad. "I thought you might be interested in seeing some viewer comments from your first appearance," he said, offering the device. "They're quite remarkable." Curious despite herself, Uwara scrolled through the comments displayed on the screen. The way she scored that bread was mesmerizing, like watching an artist. "Can we please see more of her techniques?" Finally, someone explaining why the steps matter instead of just what to do. "Her precision reminds me of my grandmother, who never measured but always got perfect results." There's something so calming about watching someone who truly masters their craft. "More bread, lady, please." And then one that made her breath catch. "Is it just me, or does she look like that architect who was in the news years ago? The one who designed those amazing coastal buildings?" Uwara handed the iPad back quickly, hoping Vincent hadn't noticed her reaction. "Very kind comments," she managed. They love you, Vincent confirmed. Authentic expertise resonates with viewers tired of influencer culture. Your segment will air this Sunday. We'll send a car for our summer filming in June, if that works for your schedule. She nodded agreement, relieved when the driver announced the car was ready to return her to Monterey. The comment about her resemblance to that architect haunted her throughout the drive, a reminder that her two identities might not remain as separate as she'd hoped. When the car dropped her at Hillcrest Bakery, where she'd arranged to use the kitchen that afternoon, Uwara was surprised to find Lena waiting outside, despite the early hour. "How was filming?" the younger woman asked, unlocking the bakery's side entrance. "The whole market's been talking about it." "Less intimidating than expected," Uwara admitted, following her into the spacious commercial kitchen. "Thank you again for allowing me to use your facilities." "Actually, I have a proposition for you," Lena said, switching on overhead lights that illuminated gleaming work surfaces and professional ovens. "My Uncle Jerry mentioned your landlord is raising your rent significantly." Uwara stiffened. "Did he? Oceanside Market property includes this building," Lena continued, seemingly oblivious to Uwara's discomfort with the personal topic. "There's an apartment upstairs that's been vacant since our last manager left. It's nothing fancy, but it's directly above the kitchen, and the rent would be reasonable. Plus, you'd have daily access to the commercial facilities." The offer was unexpected and, from a practical standpoint, potentially ideal. Living above a proper bakery kitchen would solve multiple logistical challenges, but it would also mean deeper integration into the market community after years of careful distance. "I'd need to see the space," Uwara said cautiously, "and understand the terms." "Of course." Lena produced a key ring. "We can look now if you'd like. It's been cleaned but needs some minor repairs, which we'd complete before any move-in." The apartment proved larger than Uwara's current space, with tall windows overlooking the harbor and a layout that reminded her of converted industrial lofts she'd once designed. The kitchen was small but functional, with the significant advantage of connecting directly to the commercial bakery below via a private staircase. "The market board is interested in developing an artisanal bakery presence," Lena explained as they toured the space. "Your television appearance has already increased foot traffic. They're prepared to offer reduced rent in exchange for expanded bread production and perhaps occasional workshops." "Workshops?" Uwara echoed, pausing by a window that framed the fishing boats bobbing in the harbor. "Teaching traditional techniques to small groups, nothing formal, just sharing your knowledge with people interested in learning. The market would handle registrations and provide the space." Teaching again. The thought stirred something Uwara had believed long buried, the satisfaction of sharing knowledge, watching understanding dawn in others' eyes. She'd been an effective professor before building her architectural practice, known for clear explanations of complex concepts. "I'll consider it," she said, more affected by the proposition than she wanted to reveal. "The timeline for my current apartment is tight, with the rent increase effective next month." "The repairs could be completed within 2 weeks," Lena assured her. "Jerry asked me to mention that they're particularly motivated to retain you as a market vendor, especially with your new television presence. Self-interest then, but of a mutually beneficial kind." The market wanted to capitalize on her unexpected visibility while offering solutions to her practical challenges. A fair exchange, viewed objectively. "Thank you for showing me," Uwara said. "I'll give you my decision within a few days." After Lena departed, Uwara remained in the bakery, preparing dough for tomorrow's market with mechanical precision while her mind processed the day's developments. The television filming had gone smoothly, but that viewer comment about her resemblance to that architect suggested her past might not remain buried. The apartment offer would solve her housing crisis, but further entangle her with the market, community, Every solution seemed to carry the potential for further complications. What if they are calling her now? A persistent mechanical buzz interrupted her thoughts. The bakery's landline phone mounted on the wall near the door was ringing, though she hadn't realized it was active. After a moment's hesitation, she wiped her hands on her apron and answered, "Hillcrest Bakery. This is Uara speaking." "Mom?" The single word, spoken in a voice simultaneously familiar and strange, seemed to stop time itself. Uara gripped the counter-edge for support as the room tilted momentarily around her. "Vanessa!" she whispered, hardly daring to believe. "It's me!" The voice sounded uncertain, older than in Uara's memories, but undeniably her daughter's. "I saw you on that cooking show yesterday. I've been trying to find a way to contact you. Then I remembered the market name and called their office. Someone named Jerry gave me this number." Uara's heart hammered against her ribs. 15 years of silence, broken by a cooking show segment. The absurdity of it might have made her laugh if she weren't struggling to breathe normally. "Are you still there?" Vanessa asked when the silence stretched. "Yes," Uara managed. "I'm here." Another pause as she searched for adequate words. "How are you, Vanessa?" A small, choked sound came through the line, something between a laugh and a sob. "That's such a normal question for such an abnormal situation." "I don't know what else to ask first," Uara admitted. "Fair enough." Vanessa's voice steadied. I'm okay. Living in Sacramento. I work in urban planning now. Married. I have a daughter." Each piece of information struck Uara like a physical blow. Urban planning, adjacent to architecture but distinct, perhaps a deliberate divergence from her mother's path. Married. A granddaughter whose name she didn't know. "How old is she?" Uara asked, voice barely above a whisper. 12. Her name is Lydia. 12 years of a granddaughter's life she'd missed. Birthdays, first steps, school projects, all the moments she'd experienced with Vanessa and had assumed would continue into the next generation before the scandal had severed everything. "You look different on TV," Vanessa continued when Uara didn't immediately respond. "I almost didn't recognize you at first. Then you did that thing with your hands, that precise measuring gesture. You used to do that when you were drafting." The observation pierced straight to Uara's core, that her daughter would recognize her not by her appearance, but by the unconscious mannerisms that had transferred from architecture to baking. It spoke to connections deeper than the years of separation might suggest. "Why did you call, Vanessa?" Uara finally asked, needing to understand what this unexpected contact meant. A pause, then. "I don't know exactly. Seeing you so unexpectedly after all this time, it stirred up a lot. Questions I've had, things I've wondered." "I understand," Uara said carefully, though her heart ached with the tentative nature of their exchange. This wasn't a joyful reunion, but a cautious reconnection laden with 15 years of unspoken hurt. "Are you still in Monterey? At that market?" "Yes. I've been here 15 years. Another pause. "I'm coming to San Francisco next month for a conference. It's not far from Monterey." The implied question hung in the air between them. Uara closed her eyes, simultaneously terrified and hopeful. "I would very much like to see you if you're willing." I think I'd like that too." Vanessa's voice carried a vulnerability that reminded Uara painfully of her teenage years. "I'll have details about my schedule soon. Can I call you again at this number?" "Yes, or—" Uara hesitated, then recited her cell phone number. Giving Vanessa direct access to contact her felt momentous, like opening a door that had been sealed for years. "I should go," Vanessa said after recording the number. "This is a lot." "Yes," Uara agreed softly. "For me as well. Goodbye." "Mom." The title, so casually used yet carrying such emotional weight, caught Uara off guard. "Goodbye, Vanessa," she managed before the line disconnected. For several minutes afterward, Uara remained motionless beside the phone, her dough forgotten on the counter as she processed what had just occurred. Vanessa had called her, had seen her on television, and reached out after 15 years of silence, was potentially willing to meet in person. The revelation left her dizzy with contradictory emotions. Joy at the reconnection, anxiety about what it might entail, sorrow for the years lost, hope for what might be salvaged. For so long, she'd existed in a state of suspended grief, neither fully accepting the permanent loss of her relationship with Vanessa, nor actively working to restore it. Now possibility had unexpectedly blossomed in the barren landscape of that separation. Uara returned to her dough with trembling hands, finding comfort in the familiar motions as she integrated this development into her rapidly changing reality. Television exposure, architectural consultation, a potential new apartment, and now contact from Vanessa. Her carefully controlled life was transforming with breathtaking speed. The bread she shaped that afternoon seemed to require extra attention, her usually automatic techniques disrupted by emotional turbulence. By evening, exhaustion had settled into her bones, yet her mind continued to race as she walked back to her current apartment. She found herself cataloguing details of her surroundings with renewed attention, imagining how she might describe Monterey to Vanessa, what aspects of her life here she might share. Wonder what happens next. Will Uara's relationship with her daughter be repaired? Will her television career take off? Stay tuned for the next chapter in this emotional journey. The rest of the week passed in a blur of increased market activity and practical preparations. Uara accepted Lena's apartment offer, arranging to move the following weekend. The market board formalized their workshop proposal, suggesting a modest series beginning after her summer television segment aired. William sent detailed requirements for the Anderson House documentation, scheduling a site visit for the following month. Each development advanced her along the new path she'd chosen, yet Uara's thoughts remained predominantly occupied with Vanessa's call and the possibility of reunion. She found herself rehearsing explanations, apologies, questions, all the conversations they might have when they finally stood face to face again. Sunday evening brought her second television appearance. Uara watched from Lena's office above the bakery, the two of them sharing a bottle of wine, as Vincent introduced our popular artisanal bread expert. The segment appeared even more professional than Uara had expected, her demonstrations clear and authoritative, her explanations concise. The camera work emphasized her hands' precise movements, catching the light on the blade as she executed her family's traditional scoring pattern. "You're a natural teacher," Lena commented as the segment ended. "No wonder they want you for regular appearances." The observation echoed what Uara had felt during filming, that familiar satisfaction of imparting knowledge effectively. Perhaps that element of her former identity as professor and mentor could be reclaimed in this new context. Diane's email arrived minutes after the broadcast ended, reporting enthusiastic viewer response and confirming June's filming date. Attached was a list of viewer questions they might address in future segments, ranging from technical aspects of fermentation to the history of traditional bread patterns. The following morning, Uara arrived at the market to find an unfamiliar man waiting beside her stand, camera in hand. His press badge identified him as representing a regional lifestyle magazine. "Ms. Simpson, I'm Derek Matthews from Coast Living. We'd love to do a feature on your bread making for our July issue. From market stand to television, the artisan's journey. Would you be willing to answer a few questions and allow some photographs?" The request represented yet another expansion of her public presence. Uara hesitated, weighing exposure against opportunity. What sort of personal information would this feature include? Primarily your background in traditional baking, your market presence, and the television segments. Human interest angle on preserving traditional crafts, Derek explained. Quotes about your process, philosophy on artisanal foods, that sort of thing, focused on her craft rather than her past identity then. Still, the increasing media attention carried growing risk of exposure. Someone might eventually connect Uera Simpson, bread artisan, with Tamara Richardson, disgraced architect. Yet even that possibility carried different implications now than it would have a month ago. William's reappearance suggested the architectural community's judgment might have softened with time and additional context about Marcus's broader pattern of fraud. Vanessa had reached out, despite presumably remembering the painful events of 15 years ago. Perhaps the past need not remain quite so threatening. I'd be willing to discuss my bread making, Uera agreed carefully, but I prefer to keep personal details private. My craft should be the focus, not my biography. Derek seemed content with these boundaries, scheduling a formal interview for later that week. As he departed, Uera noticed Marco giving her a thumbs up from his fish stand. The entire market seemed to be taking a proprietary interest in her growing recognition, as if her success somehow reflected on their collective enterprise. In the days that followed, Uera divided her time between market sales, preparations for her upcoming move, and preliminary research for the Anderson House documentation. Her architectural references, untouched for years, emerged from storage boxes as she refreshed her knowledge of coastal modernism. The familiar terminology and conceptual frameworks returned with surprising ease, as if that part of her mind had merely been dormant rather than abandoned. The weekend brought moving day. Jerry arranged for market staff to help transport her modest belongings to the apartment above Hillcrest Bakery. Uera found herself unexpectedly touched by the community support, having underestimated the connections she'd formed during her years of deliberate isolation. Marco's wife brought homemade tamales for the workers. The flour vendor contributed an arrangement for her new kitchen table. Even Mr. Gunnison appeared with a bottle of wine and welcome advice about which windows might need extra sealing before winter storms. By Sunday evening, Uera was settled in her new space, larger and brighter than her previous apartment, with the significant advantage of the commercial kitchen below. She stood by the windows overlooking the harbor, watching fishing boats return. As sunset gilded the water, the view reminded her of architectural renderings she'd once created for coastal properties, studies in light and perspective designed to maximize connection with natural surroundings. Her phone chimed with an incoming email. William, confirming their site visit to the Anderson House. The message included photographs of the property as it currently stood, including interior shots showing modifications made since Uera had last seen the structure she'd helped design nearly 20 years earlier. As she studied the images, Uera was struck by how the bones of her design remained evident despite subsequent alterations. The fundamental integrity of the structure persisted, even as superficial elements changed. It seemed a fitting metaphor for her own transformation, core principles intact beneath the altered exterior of her life. Another chime. A text message from Vanessa. Conference scheduled June 12th, 14 in SF. Could potentially drive to Monterey on the 15th. Would that work for you? Uera's heart accelerated as she read the message twice, absorbing its implications. A specific date, a concrete plan rather than a vague possibility. In less than a month, she might see her daughter face to face for the first time in 15 years. Yes, June 15th works perfectly, she responded, fingers trembling slightly on the screen. I'd look forward to seeing you. Too formal, too casual. How did one communicate appropriately with an estranged daughter after such prolonged separation? Uera had designed complex structural systems and reconceived her entire life from scratch. Yet this simple exchange left her uncharacteristically uncertain. Vanessa's reply came quickly. Great, I'll let you know timing when it's closer. Good night. Brief, non-committal, but a continued thread of connection nonetheless. Wara set down her phone and returned to the window, watching as the first stars appeared above the harbour. June 15th now stood as a landmark in her mental landscape, simultaneously terrifying and hopeful. The next morning, Wara experienced the luxury of descending directly to the commercial kitchen, rather than transporting ingredients from home to market. She had arranged with Lena to use the facilities from 4 a.m. until the bakery staff arrived. At 6 a.m., providing crucial additional production capacity for her expanded market sales. As she worked, Wara's thoughts continued to circle around Vanessa's impending visit. Would her daughter come alone, or might she bring her husband, the granddaughter Wara had never met? What expectations might Vanessa bring to their reunion? And how could Wara prepare herself for the emotional complexities that would inevitably arise? These questions accompanied her throughout the morning's baking and into the market day that followed. By closing time, Wara had resolved to address the situation proactively rather than allowing anxiety to build over the coming weeks. She composed a careful email to Vanessa that evening. Dear Vanessa, I've been thinking about your visit next month and wanted to reach out in advance. There's so much unsaid between us, and I imagine we both have questions and concerns about meeting again after so long. I want you to know that I understand if you prefer to keep our first meeting brief or in a public setting where you feel comfortable. I have a small office at the market where we could talk privately, or we could meet at a cafe nearby if you'd prefer neutral ground. Whatever makes this easiest for you. There's so much I'd like to know about your life, but I understand that 15 years creates boundaries that can't be crossed in a single conversation. I hope we can begin slowly, with whatever feels right to you. Whether you come alone or wish to bring your family is entirely your decision. I would, of course, be honored to meet your husband and Lydia, but I also understand if you prefer this first meeting to be just between us. Above all, I want to thank you for reaching out after seeing the television segment. It means more than I can adequately express. With love, Mom. She hesitated on the signature, wondering if Wara might be more appropriate given the years of estrangement. But Mom was who she had been to Vanessa once, and who she hoped, perhaps, to become again, in some form. She sent the email before second-guessing could overwhelm her. The reply came the following afternoon, arriving while Wara was in the middle of her magazine interview. She didn't see it until hours later, when the photographer had captured his final images of her hands shaping dough, and the writer had exhausted his questions about fermentation techniques and traditional scoring patterns. Mum, thank you for your email. I've been having similar thoughts about how to approach our meeting. I think I'll come alone this first time, not because I don't want you to meet Lydia and Daniel, my husband, but because I need to process this. Reconnection myself before involving them. A private space at the market sounds appropriate. I'd like to see where you work, the environment you've created for yourself there. I have questions, yes, many of them. Some may be difficult, but I'm not coming with anger or accusations. 15 years brings perspective I didn't have before. One thing I think you should know, Lydia has shown interest in architecture since she was very young. She designs intricate structures with whatever materials she can find. Blocks when she was younger, now computer programs and detailed drawings. I've told her about you, that her grandmother was once an architect who designed beautiful buildings. She was excited when I mentioned I might be seeing you. Until June, Vanessa Wara read the message 3 times, each reading revealing new layers of significance. Vanessa had told her daughter about her, not erased her existence completely from family history despite their estrangement. And the granddaughter she'd never met shared her architectural instincts, that eye for structure and form that had shaped Wara's first career and still influenced her approach to bread making. The revelation produced a complex emotional response: joy, At the connection, regret for the years lost, wonder about this child who carried forward a piece of her legacy without ever having met her. Yuara found herself imagining Lydia at 12, sketching buildings or manipulating digital models with the absorbed concentration Vanessa had shown at that age. In the weeks that followed, Yuara's external life continued its evolution. The magazine interview appeared, generating additional interest in her market stand and upcoming television segments. William conducted a preliminary walkthrough of the Anderson house with her, during which her architectural knowledge emerged with surprising fluency as she identified original elements and significant modifications. Her first bread-making workshop for the market sold out within days of being announced, primarily to viewers who had seen her on television and traveled specifically to learn her techniques. Yet beneath these visible developments, Yuara's emotional landscape remained primarily focused on the approaching reunion with Vanessa. She prepared her small market office, creating a comfortable space for their conversation. She reviewed old photographs, considering which she might share if the opportunity arose. She rehearsed explanations for decisions made 15 years ago, though she knew such rehearsals were likely inadequate preparation for the actual moment of reconnection. As June 15th approached, Yuara found herself increasingly distracted during her television filming, though Vincent assured her the segment on summer herb breads had been successful. The producer had mentioned viewer interest in her background, suggesting a more personal profile for future episodes, but Yuara had deflected, maintaining the boundaries between her public persona and private history. Those boundaries might eventually blur, particularly if her reconnection with Vanessa progressed, but such evolution would happen on her terms rather than for television content. The Anderson House documentation proceeded in parallel, with Yuara producing detailed analyses of the structure's significant architectural elements. William had expressed admiration for her technical assessments, noting that her expertise remained sharp despite years away from the profession. The Society had extended her consulting arrangement to include 2 additional properties, with compensation that supplemented her growing bread business income. Finally, inevitably, June 15th arrived. Yuara woke before dawn, her usual baking routine providing welcome distraction from the anxiety that had built steadily for weeks. By mid-morning, her market stand was arranged with particular care, each loaf positioned precisely, every surface spotless. She had asked Marco to cover her stand for an hour during Vanessa's scheduled arrival at noon, an arrangement he had accepted, with uncharacteristic sensitivity to her nervous state. At 11:58, Yuara stationed herself near the market's main entrance, scanning arriving visitors for a familiar face made unfamiliar by passing years. How would she recognize the daughter who had left at 28, now 43? Would Vanessa's expressions and movements still carry the echoes Yuara would recognize, or had time erased those connections as well? Have you ever experienced a reunion with someone important after many years apart? Let me know in the comments if you've been through something similar to Yuara's situation. At precisely 12:05, a woman with dark hair threaded with silver paused at the market entrance, her gaze moving systematically across the interior as if searching for landmarks. She wore a professional blazer over casual jeans, leather messenger bag slung across her body, reading glasses perched atop her head in a gesture so familiar it made Yuara's breath catch. Even before their eyes met, Yuara knew with bone-deep certainty, Vanessa. For a suspended moment, mother and daughter simply looked at each other across the market's bustle. Vanessa, taller than in Yuara's memories, her face more angular, a vertical line between her brows that hadn't existed before. Then Vanessa moved forward with the purposeful stride Yuara remembered, closing the distance between them with decisive steps. They stood facing each other, close enough to touch yet separated by 15 years of absence. Neither moved to embrace. Immediately, the gap between them filled with unspoken history. "Hello, Mom," Vanessa said, her voice steady though her hands fidgeted with her bag strap. "Vanessa," Uara replied, her own voice threaded with emotion she couldn't fully control. "You look wonderful." A small, uncertain smile touched Vanessa's lips. "You too. Different, but good different." "My office is this way," Uara said after a moment, when neither seemed to know how to proceed. "Unless you'd prefer to see my stand first?" "The stand, I think," Vanessa decided. "I'd like to see where you work." They walked together through the market, conversation limited to observations about the historic building and its vendors. Uara was acutely conscious of Vanessa beside her, the daughter she'd lost to circumstance and poor choices, now a successful professional with a family of her own. The ache of missing crucial years of her life felt physical, a hollowness beneath Uara's ribs. Marco had maintained her display with surprising care, each loaf positioned according to her usual arrangement. He discreetly withdrew as they approached, giving Uara a supportive nod that suggested he understood the significance of this visit. "So this is it," Vanessa said, examining the modest wooden stand with its careful display of artisanal breads. "Where the bread lady works her magic." The phrase from the television show created an unexpected bridge between them, Vanessa acknowledging Uara's new identity with what sounded like genuine respect rather than irony. "It's simple," Uara acknowledged, "but it's been enough." Vanessa picked up a loaf, examining the scoring pattern with clear recognition. "Your signature, like a building signature. You always had one in your designs too. That little detail that marked it as yours." The observation, so specific, so accurate, bridged Uara's two lives in a way few people could have managed. Vanessa remembered not just her mother, the architect, but the specific hallmarks of her creative process. "Would you like to see the kitchen?" Uara offered, emotion making her voice huskier than usual. "It's much improved from my apartment setup since I moved above the bakery." Vanessa nodded, following as Uara led her through the market to Hillcrest Bakery and up the private stairs to her apartment. The tour provided structure for their initial interaction, allowing them to establish conversational rhythms before addressing deeper matters. "It's lovely," Vanessa commented, examining the apartment with what Uara recognized as a professional eye for space and function. "Good light. You always said that was essential. The harbor view reminds me of projects I designed in Malibu," Uara admitted. "Different coastline, similar relationship with light and water." They settled finally in Uara's small living area, perching somewhat formally on opposite ends of the sofa. The carefully maintained distance between them seemed symbolic of their current state, connected yet separated, familiar yet uncertain. "I don't know where to begin," Vanessa confessed after a moment of charged silence. "I've imagined this conversation for years, but now that we're here—" "Perhaps with questions," Uara suggested gently. "You must have many." Vanessa nodded, visibly gathering her thoughts. "Why didn't you try to contact me? After things settled down, after the initial scandal passed, I kept expecting to hear from you." The question struck directly at the core of their separation. Uara had prepared for it, yet the actual moment of addressing it still felt overwhelming. "I believed you wanted distance," she began carefully. "Your last words to me, that you couldn't bear being associated with what happened, that you needed to build your own reputation, untainted by the scandal. I thought reaching out would only cause you more pain." "I was angry and hurt," Vanessa acknowledged, "but I never meant forever. I thought you'd fight for our relationship, try to explain what really happened. Instead, you just disappeared." "I thought I was respecting your wishes," Uara said softly. And perhaps, if I'm honest, I was ashamed. Everything I'd built, my firm, my reputation, the legacy I thought I'd leave you, it all collapsed so completely. I didn't know how to face you without all that had defined me. So you became someone else, entirely. Wara nodded slowly. Wara Simpson, bred artisan. A simpler life, built on skills my grandmother taught me rather than the career I'd lost. It felt safer. Were you ever going to try to find me? Vanessa's voice carried an undercurrent of the hurt child beneath the composed adult exterior. I thought about it constantly, Wara admitted, especially on your birthday, on holidays. I drafted letters I never sent, looked up your address, then lost courage. As years passed, it seemed increasingly impossible to bridge the gap without causing more harm than good. I looked for you too, Vanessa said, surprising Wara. After about 5 years, when my anger had cooled. But Tamara Richardson had vanished completely. No professional listings, no social media, nothing. I even hired a private investigator briefly, but the trail went cold in Southern California. I legally changed my name, Wara explained, moved to Monterey where no one knew me, started over, completely. They fell silent, the weight of 15 lost years hanging between them. Then Vanessa reached into her messenger bag and withdrew a small, flat object wrapped in tissue paper. I brought something, she said, carefully unwrapping the package to reveal a weathered architectural drawing preserved in a protective sleeve. I found this when cleaning out Dad's office after he passed. I thought you might want it back. Wara accepted the drawing with trembling hands. It was one of her early concept sketches for the Anderson House, the same building she was now documenting for William's preservation project. Her precise lines captured the structure's relationship to its coastal setting, annotations in her distinctive handwriting detailing material choices and light considerations. I remember creating this, she said softly, tracing the sketch with a gentle finger. Working at the dining table late at night while you did homework nearby, you asked so many questions about the cantilever design. You explained load distribution using my Jenga blocks, Vanessa recalled, a small smile touching her lips. Made me understand structural principles before I even knew what they were called. The shared memory created a moment of genuine connection. Between them, a thread linking their past to this tentative present. Lydia does the same thing now, Vanessa continued. Draws constantly, asks technical questions no 12-year-old should understand. Daniel's a literature professor. He jokes that he has no idea where she gets her mathematical mind. From you, Wara said. You always had exceptional spatial reasoning. And from you, Vanessa acknowledged, the admission significant in its recognition of shared heritage. Nature and nurture both, I suppose. They talked for nearly 2 hours, conversation gradually becoming more natural as initial tension eased. Vanessa described her work in urban planning, her marriage to Daniel, and Lydia's developing interests. Wara shared the evolution of her bread business, her recent television opportunities, and her tentative return to architectural consultation. So you're reclaiming pieces of your former life, Vanessa observed, after 15 years of total separation from it. In limited ways, Wara agreed. The preservation work allows me to use my knowledge without the pressures of commercial practice. The television segments are surprisingly satisfying. Teaching aspects of bread making reminds me of lecturing in the best ways. And now, reconnecting with family. Vanessa's question carried weight beyond its simple phrasing. Wara met her daughter's gaze directly. That would be the most meaningful reclamation if you're open to it. I understand it would need to develop, slowly, on terms comfortable for you and your family. I'd like Lydia to meet you, Vanessa said after a moment's consideration. She has questions about architecture that I can't answer, technical aspects beyond my training, and I think it would be good for her to know her grandmother. The word grandmother sent a surge of emotion through Wara, so powerful she had to look away momentarily to compose herself. "I would be honored to meet her," she managed finally. "Perhaps next month," Vanessa suggested. "Daniel has a conference in San Francisco in July. We could all drive down for a weekend." A concrete plan. A future meeting that included not just Vanessa, but her husband and daughter as well. Wara nodded, not trusting her voice immediately. "I should warn you," Vanessa added with a hint of amusement, "once Lydia learns you're both an architect and a baker who appears on television, you'll achieve near mythic status in her eyes." "I'm just an ordinary woman who's had an unusual life." "Path," Wara demurred. "There's nothing ordinary about you, Mom," Vanessa said with unexpected gentleness. "There never has been." When they finally parted at the market entrance, their goodbye held none of the awkwardness of their greeting. They embraced briefly but genuinely, Vanessa promising to confirm July dates soon. Wara watched her daughter walk to her car, the familiar, determined stride now belonging to a woman who had built her own life, her own family, during their years apart. The reunion had been neither the emotional catharsis nor the painful confrontation she had alternately feared. Instead, it had been something more realistically hopeful, a tentative bridge between past and future, fragile but with potential for strengthening. Back at her stand, where Marco had maintained operations throughout her absence, Wara found herself moving with a lightness she hadn't felt in years. One conversation couldn't erase 15 years of separation. But it had created possibility where before there had been only absence. "Good visit?" Marco asked, noting her changed demeanor. "A beginning," Wara replied, the simple words containing volumes of meaning she wasn't ready to fully express. The weeks that followed brought accelerating changes to Wara's carefully reconstructed life. Her third television segment aired to enthusiastic viewer response, prompting Coastal Cuisine to offer an expanded contract for the coming year. The magazine feature generated interest from a publishing house regarding a potential cookbook focusing on traditional bread techniques. Williams Preservation Society formally commissioned her documentation of 3 additional historic properties, including a courthouse she had admired since childhood. Most significantly, Vanessa maintained regular communication, texts about Lydia's latest building project, emails confirming their July visit, even a brief Sunday phone call during which Wara heard her granddaughter's voice for the first time, asking precise questions about structural support systems that revealed a mind strikingly similar to her own. As July approached, Wara found herself preparing for this expanded family visit with nervous enthusiasm. She rearranged her apartment to accommodate overnight guests, researched activities that might interest a precocious 12-year-old, and developed simplified architectural exercises that could demonstrate fundamental principles in engaging ways. The market community, having observed her transformation from solitary vendor to increasingly integrated member of their collective, supported these preparations with characteristic practical assistance. Marco suggested harbor tours his cousin operated that would showcase Monterey's historic buildings from the water. The bookstore owner reserved architecture volumes appropriate for Lydia's age. Lena offered the bakery's full facilities for a family bread-making session if Wara wished to share that tradition with her granddaughter. When Vanessa texted confirming their arrival date, Wara realized with startling clarity that her careful reconstruction of identity had entered a new phase. No longer was she creating a separate self, distinct from her past, but rather integrating the architect she had been with the baker she had become. Like the sourdough starter that connected her to her grandmother's traditions while creating something uniquely her own, her identity was proving more resilient and adaptable than she had imagined possible during those dark days 15 years earlier. The evening before Vanessa's family was scheduled to arrive, Uara stood at her apartment window, watching fishing boats return to harbor as sunset painted the water in hues that reminded her of the renderings she'd once created to show clients. How light would move through their spaces throughout the day. The architectural eye that informed her bread-scoring patterns also shaped how she viewed the world around her, not separate identities, but facets of a single, complex whole. Whatever tomorrow might bring, she would face it as her complete self. Tamara, who had designed award-winning buildings, and Uara, who created artisanal bread. Professor, who had lectured to architectural students, and television baker demonstrating traditional techniques. Woman who had lost everything and rebuilt with quiet determination. Mother, and now, potentially, grandmother as well. The bread she prepared that evening for tomorrow's family breakfast incorporated rosemary from the market's herb vendor and a touch of local honey, creating a recipe uniquely suited to this new chapter. As she shaped the loaves with practiced hands, Uara scored each with a pattern that combined elements of her traditional family design with architectural motifs from the Anderson house, past and present, professional and personal, seamlessly integrated. The woman who finished her baking preparations that night was neither entirely Tamara Richardson nor simply Uara Simpson, but rather someone both more complex and more authentic than either identity alone could encompass. The bread artisan and the architect had found unexpected harmony within the same pair of hands, creating something neither could have achieved in isolation. What more might those hands build, Uara wondered, as she watched her carefully scored loaves rise, now that they were free to incorporate all she had been and all she might yet become. The question remained unanswered, but full of promise. Like dough transformed by careful fermentation, time, and the heat of experience into something greater than its individual components. Whatever shape her future might take, Uara finally felt ready to embrace its full potential, scored with the distinctive pattern that had always been uniquely hers, whether expressed in buildings or bread. What will happen when Uara finally meets her granddaughter? Will this unexpected family reunion heal old wounds and create new possibilities? The anticipation of tomorrow's meeting fills her with both nervousness and hope. 3 sharp knocks on her apartment door the following morning announced their arrival precisely at the scheduled time. Uara smoothed her apron nervously, checked the breakfast spread one final time, and opened the door to her future. Vanessa stood there, more relaxed than during their first reunion, with a tall, bespectacled man beside her who must be Daniel. But it was the girl, partially hidden behind them, who captured Uara's immediate attention. Dark hair in a practical braid, serious eyes scanning the apartment with analytical intensity, a sketchbook clutched to her chest. "Lydia." "Welcome," Uara said, stepping back to invite them in, her voice steadier than she'd expected given the emotion tightening her throat. "Please, come inside." As they entered, Lydia emerged from behind her parents, her gaze now fixed directly on Uara with unmistakable curiosity. The girl's posture, slightly forward-leaning, observant, containing barely restrained energy, was so familiar that Uara felt a physical shock of recognition. It was like seeing Vanessa at that age, but also unmistakably like seeing herself. "You're my grandmother," Lydia stated matter-of-factly, extending her hand with formal politeness that barely contained her evident excitement. "I've brought my designs to show you." Uara accepted the small hand in her own flour-dusted one, this first physical connection to her granddaughter sending a wave of emotion through her that she struggled to contain. "I'm very pleased to meet you, Lydia. I'd love to see your designs." "They're mostly houses," Lydia continued earnestly, "but I'm working on a bridge design that needs help with the support calculations. Mum says you understand cantilevers better than anyone." Vanessa gave a small, apologetic smile over her daughter's head. "I might have built up your expertise a bit. We've brought enthusiasm and questions in equal measure," Daniel added warmly, offering his hand. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you." The breakfast that followed was initially tentative, but gradually warmed as Lydia's boundless curiosity broke through conventional restraints. The girl examined Wara's freshly baked rosemary bread with the same analytical attention she might give an architectural model, asking detailed questions about fermentation that revealed scientific understanding well beyond her years. "The structure of the crumb is affected by hydration levels and fermentation time," Shara explained, breaking open a loaf to demonstrate. "Not unlike how material properties affect structural integrity in buildings." Lydia nodded with immediate comprehension, making the same connection between disciplines that had shaped Wara's own unique approach to both architecture and baking. "Can we see your kitchen at the market? Mum says you have professional ovens." "Now, after breakfast," Vanessa interjected gently. "Let's not overwhelm your grandmother immediately." But Wara found herself unexpectedly comfortable with Lydia's enthusiasm, recognizing in it the same passion that had driven her own educational and professional journey. "I'd be happy to show you the kitchen," she assured the girl. "And perhaps you could show me those designs you mentioned." Lydia's face lit up as she retrieved her sketchbook, spreading remarkably sophisticated drawings across the breakfast table with proud confidence. "This is my main project right now. It's a house designed to withstand coastal erosion by incorporating flexible foundation elements." Wara examined the drawings with genuine admiration, recognizing technical intuition that, while naturally unrefined, showed remarkable promise. The concept addressed environmental challenges she herself had tackled in her coastal designs, approached from a fresh perspective, unencumbered by conventional limitations. "These are extraordinary, Lydia," she said truthfully. "You've considered problems many professional architects overlook." The girl beamed at the validation, launching into detailed explanations of her thought process that revealed both creativity and methodical analysis. As Wara responded with thoughtful questions and suggestions, she became aware of Vanessa and Daniel exchanging meaningful glances across the table, recognition of something significant unfolding between grandmother and granddaughter. Later, as they toured the market and bakery facilities, Wara found herself naturally shifting between her bread artisan and architect identities, explaining both fermentation science and structural elements of the historic market building with equal fluency. Lydia absorbed everything with ravenous curiosity, her questions bridging disciplines in ways that resonated deeply with Wara's own integrated approach. During a quiet moment, while Lydia examined the commercial ovens under Lena's supervision, Vanessa drew Wara aside. "She's been talking about nothing else since I mentioned this visit," she confided. "Finding you, discovering you're both an architect and a baker who appears on television, it's like all her interests suddenly have a living embodiment." "She's remarkable," Wara replied, watching her granddaughter gesture animatedly as she questioned Lena about heat distribution. "Her mind works in ways that remind me of you," Vanessa completed softly. "I've seen it for years. The way she analyzes problems, her precise drawings, even how she arranges her room with that attention to spatial flow. Daniel jokes that architectural obsession must be genetic." The observation created a moment of profound connection between them, mother and daughter, acknowledging a lineage of perception and creativity that transcended their years of separation. The day continued with a harbor tour highlighting Monterey's architectural history, during which Wara found herself naturally supplementing the guide's information with insights from her professional background. Lydia remained constantly at Her side, sketchbook in hand, absorbing every detail with focused attention that reminded Wera powerfully of herself at that age. By evening, as they shared a meal in Wera's apartment, the initial formality had dissolved into comfortable familiarity. Daniel proved to be thoughtful and warmly supportive, his literary background complementing the technical focus that dominated conversations between Wera, Vanessa, and Lydia. Their family dynamic revealed a balanced wholeness that Uara observed, with both admiration and a twinge of wistfulness for what she had missed. After dinner, while Daniel helped clear dishes, Lydia spread her sketchbook on the coffee table, showing Wara revisions she'd made to her coastal house design based on their earlier conversation. "I think the cantilever works better now," she explained, pointing to modified structural elements. "And I added the passive ventilation system you mentioned." As they discussed the improvements, Vanessa joined them, her own professional expertise in urban planning, contributing valuable context about environmental regulations and community integration. The three generations bent over the drawing together, each bringing distinct perspectives to a shared creative challenge. In that moment, something shifted within Wera, a recognition that the careful walls she'd built between her past and present were not just unnecessary, but actively limiting. The architect and the baker, the professional and the artisan, the woman who had lost everything and the one who had rebuilt, all were essential aspects of who she truly was, most fully expressed, when integrated rather than compartmentalized. Later that night, after Lydia had finally succumbed to sleep on the pull-out sofa and Daniel had tactfully retired to give mother and daughter privacy, Uara and Vanessa sat by the apartment windows overlooking the moonlit harbor. "She worships you already," Vanessa said quietly, glancing toward her sleeping daughter. "One day with her architectural hero grandmother, and I think we've lost her heart forever." "She's extraordinary," Uara replied, emotion making her voice slightly husky. "You've raised her beautifully, Vanessa." A comfortable silence settled between them before Vanessa spoke again, her voice thoughtful. "I've been thinking about what you said during our first reunion, about becoming Wara Simpson because it felt safer than remaining Tamara Richardson." Wara nodded, waiting for her daughter to continue. "Watching you today, moving so naturally between explaining bread fermentation and architectural cantilevers, showing Lydia both worlds with equal passion." Vanessa paused, seeming to search for precise words. "It made me realize that perhaps the most authentic version of you incorporates both identities." The observation struck Uara with its perceptive accuracy, articulating the integration she herself had been feeling throughout the day. "I think you're right," she acknowledged. "For years I kept them separated, as if the architect and the baker couldn't coexist, but today felt whole," Vanessa supplied. "You seemed whole today, Mom. More yourself than I remember seeing you, even before everything fell apart." The insight carried profound weight coming from her daughter, who had known her through multiple life phases and transformations. Uara reached across the space between them, tentatively covering Vanessa's hand with her own. "Thank you," she said simply, "for seeing that, for coming here, for allowing me to meet Lydia." Vanessa turned her hand to grasp her mother's firmly. "This is just a beginning," she said, echoing Wara's words from their first reunion. "Lydia will never let us stop visiting now that she's found her architect-baker television grandmother." They shared a quiet laugh, the sound bridging years, of silence with surprising ease. The following morning brought additional evidence of shifting dynamics as Lydia insisted on helping prepare breakfast, absorbing Uara's bread-making instructions with the same intensity she'd shown toward architectural principles. Daniel contributed literary references to the history of bread in various cultures, while Vanessa added practical suggestions about incorporating the workshop element into Uara's television segments. You should write a book, Daniel suggested, as they enjoyed the results of their collaborative baking effort. Not just recipes, but the connections between architectural principles and bread making. The structural integrity of different doughs, the scientific aspects of fermentation. It's a unique perspective. The publisher who contacted me was only interested in traditional recipes, Uara noted. But that integrated approach would be more meaningful. Mom's agent might be interested, Vanessa offered unexpectedly. She handles architectural and culinary books. I could introduce you. The casual offer represented a significant shift, Vanessa actively helping to bridge Uara's past expertise with her current specialty, supporting integration rather than separation of identities. By the time departure preparations began later that day, patterns for future connection had been established. Lydia extracted promises of regular video calls to discuss her design projects. Daniel invited Uara to guest lecture in his university's interdisciplinary arts program when she visited Sacramento. Vanessa proposed monthly family calls and quarterly in-person visits, establishing a rhythm of connection that acknowledged both their renewed relationship and practical geographic limitations. Standing in the market parking lot beside their loaded car, Uara felt a complex mixture of emotions: satisfaction at connections established, sadness at the impending separation, but predominantly a sense of continuity that had been absent. From her life for 15 years, Lydia hugged her fiercely before climbing into the back seat. I'm going to revise my coastal house design based on everything we talked about, she promised, and I want to try that rosemary bread recipe when we get home. Send me photos of both, Uara replied, returning the embrace with equal warmth. I'll be eager to see how they turn out. Daniel's goodbye was respectfully affectionate, his parting words thoughtful. You've given Lydia something invaluable this weekend, a vision of how passion and precision can shape a fulfilling life across multiple disciplines. Finally, Vanessa stood before her, their relationship transformed yet again by the shared experience of the past 2 days. This feels different than saying goodbye 15 years ago, she observed quietly. Because it's not an ending, Uara replied, just a brief separation within an ongoing connection. Their embrace held none of the tentative quality of their first reunion, instead carrying the substance of rebuilt trust and mutual respect. As their car disappeared around the harbor curve, Uara remained in the parking lot, absorbing the significance of the weekend. The family she had lost and mourned had returned in evolved form, not erasing the 15-year separation, but incorporating it into a new configuration that acknowledged both past and present. Walking back through the Sunday market, Uara noticed details with renewed appreciation. The structural elegance of the historic building's roof supports, the careful arrangement of vendors creating optimal flow patterns, the quality of light filtering through aged windows. Her architect's eye and baker's sensibility merged seamlessly as she observed her surroundings, no longer compartmentalizing these aspects of her perception. At her apartment, she found evidence of the weekend throughout the space. Lydia's forgotten pencil beside architectural sketches on the coffee table, Daniel's literary journal bookmarked on the side table, Vanessa's light scarf draped over a kitchen chair. Small, tangible reminders that her carefully isolated life had opened to include family once again. On impulse, Uara retrieved her phone and composed a message to William at the Architectural Heritage Society. I've been considering your offer to expand my involvement with the Coastal Documentation Project. If the position remains available, I would like to discuss taking on additional properties beyond the initial agreement. Recent developments in my personal circumstances have made me reconsider the balance of my professional activities. She sent the message before second-guessing could intervene, then opened her calendar to block time for her next television filming date. Beside it, she noted Lydia's upcoming school architecture competition, which Vanessa had mentioned during breakfast. In the formerly empty weekend spaces, she began marking potential visits to Sacramento, sketching the outlines of a life newly expanded to include both bread artistry and architectural expertise, solitude and family connection. Later that evening, as she prepared dough for the next day's market sales, Uara found herself incorporating a scoring pattern that combined elements from her family's traditional design with structural motifs from the Anderson House documentation. The integration felt right, authentic, in a way that maintaining rigid separation between her identities never had. The bread artisan and the architect worked through the same hands now, shaping dough with the precise movements that had once drafted award-winning buildings, not separate identities, but a single woman whose life had taken unexpected turns without diminishing her fundamental self. As she worked, Uara reflected on the transformation that had occurred, not just over the weekend, but throughout the month since that first unexpected television appearance. The bread lady from Oceanside Market was emerging from 15 years of careful anonymity, reclaiming pieces of herself previously abandoned while maintaining the new identity she'd constructed. The result wasn't a return to her former life, but the creation of something new and more integrated, like sourdough itself, transformed through time and circumstance into something with greater complexity and character than its original components might have suggested. Outside her kitchen window, lights from fishing boats dotted the harbor darkness, their reflections creating dancing patterns on the water's surface. Uara paused in her work to appreciate the view, her perception encompassing both the architectural significance of the historic waterfront and the sensory beauty of the natural setting. In that moment of quiet appreciation, Uara Simpson, formerly Tamara Richardson, presently bread artisan and consulting architectural preservationist mother and grandmother, felt herself fully present as a woman whose identity transcended any single definition or chapter of her remarkable journey. The bread beneath her hands took shape with the assured movements of a master artisan, scored with patterns that told her unique story of loss and rebuilding, separation and reconnection, professional disgrace and reclaimed expertise. Like the building facades she'd once designed to withstand coastal elements while showcasing structural elegance, her reimagined life incorporated both resilience and beauty in its fundamental architecture. Tomorrow, she would return to her market stand, serving customers drawn by both her traditional bread-making and her television visibility. Next week, she would document another historic building, her architectural knowledge contributing to preservation efforts. In the months ahead, she would welcome Vanessa's family for another visit, the connections between generations strengthening with each interaction. The woman who had once sold bread anonymously at a small coastal market had transformed, not by abandoning that identity, but by expanding it to incorporate all she had been and all she might yet become. Like the market building itself, historic bones supporting contemporary purpose, she had found strength in integration rather than replacement, history informing present without constraining future possibilities. As Uara completed her evening's baking preparations, she felt a profound sense of alignment that had been absent during her years of careful separation from her past. The bread artisan and the architect had found harmony within the same pair of hands, creating something neither could have achieved in isolation. And that, perhaps, was the most unexpected and valuable discovery of all. Congratulations. Type 9 in the comments so that I know you stayed until the end with me. Thank you for watching, and until tomorrow's story on this same channel.